Alright, rant time. I'm gonna push up a lot of people's buttons right now with what I'm about to say. I think we need to purge the audio industry of old and outdated designs. I'm getting tired of recommending the same sets to people that are based on designs that are 30 plus years old. You know, like the Beyerdynamic DT990. That's a can that's 34 years old as of 2022 and still counting. Sennheiser HD650s came out in 2003, that's almost 20 years old now, and I hate to say it, but these cans sound audibly old. When you listen to them, doesn't matter how technically capable you think they are or how good you think they measure on a graph, they sound old. You put them on, and to a lot of people, even newfound enthusiasts, they're not super impressive. They're a little bit underwhelming the first time you hear them. If you've been listening to the hype around them, or you've heard your favorite hobbyists just kind of always refer to them, you know, as the baseline, which I've even found myself referring them to that, as I've daily driven a number of Sennheiser cans, the HD58X being one of them. I daily drove those for about a year, and those were my introduction to the lower mid-fi echelon of headphones, and they were very underwhelming the first time I heard them because people have a false sense of, oh, it's open back, it'll just have this wide and spacious soundstage by comparison to closed-back headphones. Well, that's just false. Yes, they are more capable of producing soundstage in an open chassis or an open enclosure, but some headphones can choose whether or not to take advantage of that, and Sennheiser in the 500 and 600 series line of headphones does not take advantage of that, and they are actually spectacularly narrow given their open back design, and you can like put your hands over the back of the can and it will not get any narrower nearly on a lot of them, which is a lot different as to say for a Hyphen and Ananda. You put your hand over the back of the enclosure, the sound completely changes. Do that to a 500 or 600 series Sennheiser can. It's going to sound practically the same. So consumers get this false sense of, oh, it's just going to be wide and spacious because it's open back. It's not. It's narrow, it's in your head. And I've had closed back cans with more soundstage. That's what I came from. I came from a closed back gaming headset, not recommending it, and I was expecting to move into this lower mid-fi echelon of headphones and just be impressed. Oh, it's open back. Oh, it's Sennheiser, you know? It's a big name, probably one of the biggest names in the audio industry in general, with just the broadest recognition in the audiophile marketplace in general. And it's not that spectacular. Like, it's tuned okay, it extends well into the low end, it's got a good punch to it, kinda. I mean, by comparison to like the HD6XX, which I have behind me here, this thing, HD58X extends well by comparison to that, which also extends okay, but is missing a lot of that initial oomph, that punch and rumble. That doesn't have that. HD58X has more of that, but again, not that much in general. And then now we're gonna start speaking to cans like the DT990, which has an elevated bass response, I would say, and extends well down to about 20 hertz nearly perfectly. It's still an old sounding headphone, and it's a little bit bright. Sennheiser carries that veil and that darker tonality, and Bear comes in here, elevated sub-bass response, a little bit warm, and then also a little bit bright. Better imaging, marginally better soundstage, still sounds old, and not really quite as dynamic as any of the more modern offerings, because they just audibly sound old, and I don't know how to get this across enough to any newfound enthusiasts or people browsing the market looking for what to buy. You can go with what's trusted and has been out for 20, 30 plus years, sure. I mean, that's not to say you will or won't be disappointed by them, but just that we need to start a new industry standard where we start updating our cans every decade or so, because you have these headphones sitting around for that long. You mean to tell me technology hasn't gotten any better since then? We can't do any better for the price? We can. You can. Do it, please, instead of passing off the same thing for 20, 30 years. I mean, yeah, they're exceptional headphones, or should I say acceptable. They more or less kind of disappear into your setup and just become another one of your peripherals once you get used to the overall tonality of any of them. But that's not to say that that rids them or gives them pass on their technical insufficiencies that they have over more modern drivers, or more modern drivers and more modern chassis. I think a good example of this is the fact that the HD 6XX based on the HD650 is pretty much irrelevant to me. I have it right there behind me. I got it to test because I had the HD58X and I thought, oh, it was okay, but if the HD6XX can be a little bit better than that, just maybe that'll be the one to recommend. And no, I'm actually probably going to recommend that less now that I've tried it, because now I do actually know how it sounds, and I prefer the 58X over it. Yes, the HD6XX is a marginally more technically proficient than the HD58X in terms of separation or just overall detail, maybe even a little bit in terms of imaging or soundstage, just a little bit, but it's still really narrow. It's still got 3 blob imaging, and it doesn't have the same punch because it doesn't have the same sub-bass extension. So that equates them to, in my head, about the same level after you do all the adding and subtracting. I have a chart that I marked out of what I rate each individual category in terms of extension, tonality, separation, detail, resolution, imaging, soundstage, timbre, candor, and dynamics. For both of those cans, can you guess what I rate them as? The HD58X came to a total of 40 out of 100, and the HD650 or 6XX came to a grand total of 42 out of 100. 2 points difference after equating the differences. That's not significant, and I would not really say worth the price difference either. I wouldn't say either of them are even worth the price necessarily. You could probably overlook them and be perfectly fine. I'm gonna upset so many people by saying everything I've just said, but it's true. It's honest. I mean, Headphone owns, I'd say, a fair say of the market when it comes to the HE400 SE. I'd say that owns everything up to the $200 price point, and I'd say the Sundara owns everything from the $350 to $500 price point, and I'd say the Edition XS holds everything from the $500 price point onwards to, let's say, $700, $800, wherever the Ananda sits. And then the Ananda is marginal step above that. It's more comfortable as well. The more competitive dynamic drivers start to come into play, like the Focusrite. And then next step up from that would be the Headphone Aria, and then it's above that, the Susvara, and like Headphone just owns like a very large place of the market, and they're just kind of everywhere throughout the price brackets, and you can just kind of pick one of them in that price range and know that you're not really going to be disappointed with it because it's technically proficient for the price and still acceptable by modern standards because they're not 20-30-year-old designs. The Ananda is my favorite headphone under $1,000 for that. Not just my favorite planar under $1,000, but my favorite headphone in general under $1,000. Aside from the Focusrite and such. I think that's about everything. So thank you for joining me on this rant. Somebody had to say it, or somebody had said it at some point before being barraged with fanboyisms afterwards, but I'd like to say that as well, and that is all.